Hannah Holden. Hannah has done a number of different sessions for us. If you were at conference last year, you may have heard her session about dealing with change. But in this session today, she's going to be talking about the business case for employee well-being. So even if your employers really don't care that much about your mental health and well-being, what is the bottom line for them, and why do they really have to take these issues seriously? I'm delighted to hand over to Hannah for our next session. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Sue, for a great session. Yes, so as Mark hinted, I have spoken at a few ITSMF events before, including the wellbeing event last year. And so when I was asked to speak today, I was thinking, what could we talk about that's a little bit different, that looks at well-being with a slightly different angle. So today I am indeed talking about why we need to worry about it. And I think that I'd hope that most organizations are well beyond the fruit bowls by this point. But yeah, let's talk about why we need to pay attention to everybody's well-being. So I'll be talking about why it's not just nice to have. I thought that despite the fact that it wasn't entirely planned, Sue's and my presentations dovetail one another really nicely, because I'm going to have a look a bit at what's happening to your brain when you're stressed, which touches on the threat response that Sue was explaining earlier. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the unique pressures in IT and ITSM. And I'm only sharing one tool today, and they are not the ones that Sue shared with you, so something slightly different. And then hopefully I will rattle through this fast enough for us to have some interaction and discussion, but feel free to keep chatting in the chat. All right, so before I do, who am I for any of you who haven't met me? I have been in IT for over 20 years, mostly in IT consulting. I have personal experience of burnout. That was back in 2013. So I'm glad to say that I am fully recovered and evidence that you can recover. Um, and before that, I did a biotechnology degree. So I'm also really interested in the science of stress. So I always try and weave these things together, a bit of personal experience, a bit of the science of stress, because I think when you understand what's happening in the body when you're stressed, it all begins to make sense. Like, why does one person experience eczema when they're stressed and the other person gets IBS? When you understand how stress is working in the body, it all kind of clicks into place and makes sense. And I love anything somatic. So the suggestion in the chat about humming, that's one humming is one of my all-time favorite techniques, because nobody knows you're doing it when you're on a conference call and you're on mute. Just make sure you're on mute. Yeah, and I've got multiple yoga teacher trainings. Kundalini yoga is my all-time favorite type of yoga, because it really targets the nervous system. And all of this, I think, ultimately boils down to what's going on with our nervous systems. So yeah, that's me. Um, but now I wanted to talk about you. So this is a really easy question to get started with. Does your organization offer any form of well-being initiatives? Yes, no, and you can drop examples if there's something in particular that pops into your mind. So we're getting yeses. Good, good. Yoga classes and meditation classes. That's interesting. And lots. Somebody says yes, lots. Claire, that's great. Yeah, okay. Mind tools, well-being day. My org is me. Yeah, I understand what that feels like. Um, okay, cool. And inclusive networks. I think that's really important, because social interactions really do help us navigate stress, whether that be sharing your experiences or just connecting with people. Because when we connect with people, it releases oxytocin, which reverses the stress response. So yeah, the more we can chat to people, connect with people, laugh with people. All right, there's loads going on in the chat. Great. Now I'm going to say, and how helpful are these interventions when you hit a crisis? So let's take an ITSM example. Major incident, 2 a.m. How helpful are the interventions? Helpful, irrelevant, or somewhere in between? I'm not seeing anything. The mind, yes, helps me get back to sleep. Helpful, good. Okay. After, yes, after service recovery, helpful. Yeah, not so easily accessible at the time. Yeah, okay. After the crisis, yes. All right. Now I want to look at um, the state of well-being in the UK. So I'll talk generally, and then we'll talk about some of the stats from IT. And you probably picked up the tone of voice has changed. It's not a pretty picture. 79% of UK employees are experiencing some form of work-related stress. 52% of work-related ill health is linked to stress. I don't think that's a surprise to us. And 22.1 million working days are lost due to stress, depression, and anxiety, and there is a year-on-year increase. And it's costing approximately 51 billion per annum to UK employers. The good news on this slide is that a Deloitte study suggests that every pound invested into well-being shows a return on investment of £4.70. And I think it's bigger than that because I think that the impact is harder to measure than what they've looked at. So they've particularly looked at productivity savings and attendance in order to come up with that number so that it's measurable. But I think it goes beyond that, and I'll touch on that in a moment. Well-being in IT. I think it suddenly gets even worse, I'm afraid. 71% of people in IT are reporting burnout. Now, I think that's having experienced burnout myself, I think that there will be some people in there who are saying, yeah, I feel a bit burned out, as in they're feeling exhausted, they're feeling run down. I would hope that that's not 71% of people who are actually in full scale burnout, because I don't think we'd be functioning at all. So I think that there's like, I'd want to dig into that statistic, but either way, people are feeling exhausted and they're certainly experiencing periods of stress, which means that they're now saying they feel burned out. 65% struggling with work demands, 81% of leaders acknowledge that there are increased demands. And despite the fact that everybody's raving about AI, 77% of employees are saying that it's increasing their workload at this point rather than decreasing it. Hopefully, that utopia where AI is helpful is on the horizon, but for now, the stats are telling us that actually it's creating more work. So, Sue touched on this too. What does it take to work in IT? What do you need to be good at? You need to be good at complex troubleshooting. You need to be calm. You need to be good at making decisions under pressure. You need to be good at stakeholder management. You need to clearly communicate to people. You need to be good at problem solving and creative thinking. And all of these require the higher functions of your brain to be switched on. So the prefrontal cortex, the bit of the brain that humans like to set themselves apart from the rest of animal kind by talking about all the things that we're great at, which is coming from our prefrontal cortex. And you need that to be switched on in order to be able to be good at all of those things, because the prefrontal cortex is where our rational mind is, our logical mind, our ability to empathize with people. So a quick question before we look at what's going on in the stress response. Have you seen anyone, or it could be yourself or others, make mistakes that they wouldn't have made under pressure? So this might be the way that they've responded to somebody, how they've handled a situation, or a more technical mistake potentially. And you can just give me like a wave in the chat if you've seen this or yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm just having a quick read back because there was quite a bit of chat whilst I was talking. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. If you're juggling 10 things, there's always something to be dropped. Yeah. And then it gets worse because then you start to tell yourself that you've done you've messed up the one ball that you dropped, despite the fact that you still have nine in the air. I think we're all familiar with that. Yes, and then it creates a vicious circle. Yeah. Okay. So what's happening in the brain? The amygdala in the brain has one job, which is to decide whether or not we're safe and whether or not we need to instigate the stress response, if we need to run from the beast or fight the beast. And so it is constantly taking inputs from all of our senses. So it's taking in visual inputs, auditory inputs, the temperature on our skin. It's taking in it's processing massive amounts of information constantly. And it's also taking feeds from the brain itself. So when we have negative thoughts, that can also feed through the amygdala, and we suddenly think just from a thought we can trigger the stress response. It doesn't have to be something outside us. And so it's constantly scanning the environment for, am I safe or not safe? And so we call it the stress response. Sue used the word threat response earlier, which I think is also a good way of looking at it, because effectively the amygdala is looking for, are there threats to my safety? Am I safe or not safe? If it decides that I'm safe, then nothing happens and it carries on scanning the environment. If it decides I'm not safe, then it will trigger a cascade of responses in the body. And it assesses whether I'm safe or not safe. It works very closely with the hippocampus, which is about organizing our memories. And so somebody who has had more negative experiences is more likely to have an amygdala that says there are more scenarios that are not safe. And so it's more likely to be pulling the stress response. So somebody who's had a lot of trauma is more likely to experience higher levels of stress more frequently than somebody who hasn't, because of the way that the amygdala works to assess whether or not we're safe. It's looking at past experiences, and therefore it's kind of looking for sounds and temperature changes and all these subtle things that can set us off. And of course, because it's linked to our memories, we all have very different things that will set us off. So, like a big guy with a deep voice walking into the room and saying hello might give one person a fright, whilst the other person's like, oh, hi. So it's very nuanced as to what triggers our stress response. Anyway, when the amygdala triggers the stress response, it does this through the nervous system initially, and then through the bloodstream. So through our endocrine system, adrenaline gets released into the blood, and glucose gets released into the blood in readiness for our muscles to run from the beast or fight the beast. So, and very quickly, within less than a split second, our entire body knows that the stress response has been triggered. Every cell in your body is affected when you are stressed, because those biochemicals are released into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream ultimately creates the environment for every cell in our body. And this is why we can have such a vast array of different symptoms associated with stress. And that, as I said, all happens in a split second before our conscious mind has figured out what on earth just happened. So it takes a while, it takes about a second for the conscious mind to go, oh, there was a big sound. That's why I suddenly feel anxious. So the conscious brain is somewhat behind the subconscious brain and the physical body in recognizing that we're stressed, which is how we jump out of the way of buses without even realizing there was a bus. It's like, oh yes, that just happened, and the logical brain is catching up. So that's what's happening. And when we're in our stress response, then our blood and our oxygen is being prioritized out to the muscles. Any non-essential functions are deprioritized. And unfortunately, in the body, the higher brain functions are considered to be one of the things that get deprioritized. So when we are stressed, so under normal circumstances, our prefrontal cortex is in control. It regulates our emotions. It allows us to sort of be in a meeting and think, well, that's a bit annoying, but I'm not going to respond to that just yet. I'll think about how to deal with that later. It's controlling all of that. So we're not as reactive when we're in that state. When we're stressed, the prefrontal cortex is not being prioritized. The amygdala begins to take more control, and we are far more reactive. So hopefully this is beginning to make sense as to how somebody makes mistakes, because they don't have access to the parts of their brain that are required for logic, for empathy, and control of our emotions. That's all being weakened when we're in our stress response. So of course we're more likely to say something out of turn, to not think through. One of the comments in here was badly wording emails, trying to use your logical, rational brain along with the empathy to be able to phrase an email that makes sense but also conveys the right tone. That's really hard if you're super stressed, because you don't have access to the parts of the brain that you need in order to be able to do that task well. So I think that the real cost goes beyond what we're measuring in terms of people showing up to work, even people's reports on how happy they feel at work. I think that this goes far beyond all of that. This is about the quality of our work, and our ability to not make those mistakes, our ability to creatively problem solve. Again, Sue touched on this earlier, where when we're stressed, we get up close to the details. We are very reactive and we repeat learned behaviors. So we rely very much on, you must have heard people talk about how neurons that fire together wire together. We have we get a bit lazy and we use pathways that are well trodden within the brain when we're stressed, which means that we go to automatic responses and automatic behaviors. If we want to change that, then we need to be in our parasympathetic nervous system. And with our parasympathetic nervous system, we are able to see the big picture. We are able to make choices about how we want to respond to things rather than just be reactive. And we're also able to say, actually, I'm going to try something a bit different. Whereas when you're in the stress response, those pathways, those neural pathways that you usually use will be firing and you'll just be doing the habitual patterns will be coming out. There's a lack of empathy, and that will, of course, affect collaboration and being able to work with stakeholders. And the talk that I gave at the conference last year now, a couple of months ago, was about how it also makes us very resistant to change, because when our stress response, the amygdala does not like change. And it will fire off the stress response when it thinks that things are changing, whether that be positive or otherwise. So hopefully this is all beginning to make sense, and you're beginning to join the dots as to how we've seen behaviors change when somebody is stressed, how we've seen people or ourselves make mistakes, and also what's actually going on in the body, what's going on with the brain, and it's all beginning to make sense. And hopefully you're getting the aha moments of what the bigger picture is here, what the real cost of stress and people's well-being is, and how, it's so much more than the productivity savings. It's the quality of people's work, the richness of their work, the ability to bring new ideas. So yeah, if you've had any aha moments, then please do drop them in the chat and share. That would be great to hear. Now, I wanted to talk about interventions, and I think it's important to recognize that for burnout, there are two sides to, also relates to parenting. Yes, parenting is also a very stressful role that we get to play. There are two sides to burnout. So one is what's going on internally with the person. So that's things like self-worth. How do we talk to ourselves? And we can give people tools like the ones that Sue was talking about earlier to help people regulate their nervous system and understand how they're feeling and why they're feeling that and process all of that. Then there's the environmental stuff, which is everything that's happening around the person. And when somebody experiences burnout, they're in this perfect storm of an environment that is creating stress for them, and a lack of tools or a lack of ability to put those tools into place on the personal side, and then you end up with this perfect storm of burnout. So interventions also need to consider both sides. I think I'm very passionate about giving people tools and empowering people with things that they can do as individuals, regardless of the context, whether that be parenting, major incidents, a toxic work environment, whatever's going on for you. But I think also it's important to acknowledge that the workplace and our environment also contribute. So when I talk about personal tools, I talk about awareness, I talk about understanding what the stress response looks like, what's happening in the body, and also how to spot how you are, how to recognize I'm stressed today or I'm not stressed today. Then giving people techniques to be able to do something about it, and then also having habits, because it's all very well attending a session like this and learning techniques, but what we really want you to do is then take them away and become habitual with them. And really put them into use. So box breathing is a perfect example of something that you could be doing whilst you've got a major incident at 2 a.m. You can consciously think, okay, I've got a complex problem, I've got difficult stakeholders, I'm going to give myself 20 seconds here just to regulate myself and be able to bring my prefrontal cortex back online and see the bigger picture and show up in a better place. Because regardless of what's going on, you can give yourself, 30 seconds to give yourself a reset. So, the one that I wanted to share with you is the physiological sigh. I think this is the fastest way to reset your stress response. So, we'll just practice this briefly together. It involves fully inflating the lungs and then inflating them a bit more and then breathing out really, really slowly. So, you can join in with me. So, what we do is we breathe in through the nose till we're full, and then we top up until we're full to bursting. Brief pause, and then out through the lips as if you're breathing through a straw, as long and slow as you can. And I'd like us to practice that together once more. So in through the nose till you're full, all the way up till you're full to bursting, and then out through the lips. Okay, and you can see how fast that works. I already can feel the effects of that. Oh, it tingles through my system. I love that. I think it's really interesting what Simone has called out in the chat because it's so true that giving yourself 20 to 30 seconds isn't that much and is you can do that in almost any crisis, especially when I'm thinking in terms of, it's not life-threatening. We're talking about IT major incidents here. I think that you can. The other thing is you can do it at the same time. So you might be on that conference bridge and you can be practicing these breath practices at the same time as listening, taking notes, thinking about what the solution might be, etc. So I think it's really important that we also take away that you can do these things at the same time. You don't need to go take yourself off to a separate room and practice yoga for 10 minutes before coming back. There are tools that you can use in real time. So, yeah, I just wanted to point out that interventions, therefore, can be on the personal side and on the environmental side. This is a new slide and a new aha moment for me recently because I wear two hats. One is talking about stress and burnout, and the other is IT operating model design and assessing maturity of IT operating models. And if we look at the maturity of IT organizations, the low end, so if we're talking about CMMI maturity levels, the low end is hero culture, it's reactive firefighting, it's the same individuals being pulled into last minute project issues, but they're also the people who are needed for fundamental operational work, and also they'll be the one that's required for the major incidents, etc. So we have pockets of knowledge in a few key individuals, and that is very much at the low maturity end of the spectrum. At the high end of maturity, we have it's very data driven, it's very predictable, it's far more proactive. We're doing a lot more proactive problem management, we're doing less incident management, we're being more strategic, we're able to plan our time and our activities, and there are shared and standard processes which do not go out the window when things start going wrong, and there's shared knowledge. And I think it's really interesting that if we look at that spectrum and we look at what's happening with people's nervous systems within that spectrum, if you are in a hero culture firefighting, your nervous system is going to be in fight and flight. And if you're in this kind of see the big picture, data driven, proactive, predictable, you are going to be far more in your parasympathetic nervous system. And the other thing that's interesting is if we think about the type of environment that an individual creates. So I think these are kind of complementary. It's a bit chicken and egg. Where do we start? Somebody who is in their parasympathetic nervous system will be far more hero type behavior, trying to save the day, trying to fix the thing in front of them, focusing on the here and now, and not necessarily, we don't have time to think big picture and how we're going to fix this whole operating model more holistically and prevent this from happening. We need to fix today. And somebody who's more in their parasympathetic nervous system is far more likely to try and create an environment where we are being more strategic and more planned. So I wanted to share that with you because it really was like an aha moment for me that the two are kind of on the same spectrum together. I'm skipping over that slide intentionally because you guys know what good looks like and what bad looks like within ITSM. So yes, there are personal interventions, as I said before, and there are environmental interventions. And the personal ones would be like mindset work, skills development, not just skills like how to manage stress, but also communication skills. It might be harder skills to do. It could be ITSM training. It could be anything that upskills you and makes you better at doing your job and gives you the confidence. And then environmental things would be like looking at process maturity, looking at tooling maturity, looking at how we can become more data driven. Also, how can we create a culture that feels safe, that we're no longer in a kind of blame culture? How can we create safety for everybody? Look at leadership capabilities, improve managers' skill sets, etc. So yeah, that's that. Those were the thoughts that I wanted to share with you. And if you wanted more tools, then you can use this QR code, which takes you to my stress reset toolkit. I have a podcast called Burnout Isn't Necessary. There's about 40 different episodes, people sharing their personal experiences of burnout, me sharing mine, also hints, tips, things you can do. So enjoy that. And I think we're going to be out of time, and I'm not able to stay, I'm afraid, for the Q&A at the end of today's session. So if you do have questions for me or feedback, then you are more than welcome to come find me on LinkedIn and yeah, ask away. It would be great to hear from you.